Look at that. Look at that hover. That's control for you, that is. That is the Huey. We are in the Canadian colours. Just showing off some of my mean helicopter skills. Welcome everybody, welcome to Flight Past. And my name is Simon, and we are using this Huey today in the Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, and we're looking basically at moments in history. And if you've been following along, we're here, we're at in southern Belgium, and we are at the battlefield site of the of Waterloo. This is where Napoleon meets Wellington, and today we are continuing our discussion about this battle, and we're actually getting to the closing stages now. In the last stream, we were talking about the events that occurred over here. And this is the area where the Prussians came from, and we talked about Bulu's 4th Corps coming through here, the 2nd Corps of Perch coming through this area, and then over here on the on this northeastern side was where Zaitin's 1st Corps arrives on the battlefield. And we talked all the way about the whole fight for this village called Plancenoit, and how that affected the battlefield site. Plancenoit is this village just here. So we now divert our attention back now towards Wellington. But we're in full knowledge now that the events that are occurring up on this ridge here, where you can see this mound, is that has been affected by what's happening down here on Napoleon's right. And we can talk now about the Haye Sainte, the farmhouse. Round about this time, 4:35 o'clock, we've got the French cavalry attacks coming up here, but they're not being supported by infantry. But La Haye Sainte starts to essentially run out of ammunition. It's this place here, it's an enclosed farmhouse. It's not really a fortified building. It's more just a sort of a quadrangle of farm buildings, not like Hougoumont. It's got a little bit more of a wall. It's got some loopholes in it, and it's got firing steps and stuff like that. But they were so desperate for warmth that they'd actually destroyed the barn gate to burn it in the night. So the actual west side of the farmhouse of La Haye Sainte was actually open at the time. Obviously it had some stuff in it to block it, but it wasn't actually a closed gate. The Major Baring, who was in charge of the defense of La Haye Sainte, had around about 400 men in there, and during the course of the day Wellington had been supplying him with as much reinforcements as he could dare at the time. And allowed him to essentially lose the orchard of La Haye Sainte, which is this area to the south of it. We'll just zoom in, fly in here a little bit closer. We're using the drone. So this area to the south of La Haye Sainte, where these you can see these small trees, was an orchard. And Wellington allowed Baring to basically essentially come out into this orchard whenever he had to, but he could lose it if he wanted to, but do not lose the buildings themselves. And the reason why these buildings are so important, you've got essentially skirmishes in this building here, and it makes any attempt for the French to bring up artillery impossible in this area, because they will just be sharpshooted away. So this is an important position to control in the during the course of the battle. But with the course of, when we remember d'Erlon's infantry attacks over here, and essentially being surrounded a lot of the times in this building here, this the farmhouse starts to run out of ammunition. And essentially, Napoleon is aware of the strategic importance of this position. A bit like Hougoumont, and he tells Ney that this has got to be captured at all costs. And so, around about this time, thousands of infantry now are used to attack the farmhouse with some cavalry support. And they moved in from this side here, and they describe how using the folds of the battlefield to disguise their approach. And what I think it means is disguise the approach from the ridge above. Now remember, this pile of dirt over here on this conical is should be put back on the ridge, so this ridge might be a little bit steeper. And what they're talking about is they can, when they're down here, then they're not can be attacked from up on this side here, and you can use the folds to approach this way. Okay. The attack here is supported by artillery as well. This enables them to get right up to the building, and they start wrestling the weapons through these sort of holes that they've made. And hand-to-hand combat around this area, on this barn. Even missing the door here, look. Sainte describes this scene as well in this area of the barn, that they actually used the bodies of Frenchmen to pile up in the barn door entrance as a barricade. Bering's situation is getting really bad at this time, and they're requesting ammunition. And it's at this time that the walls start to be scaled by the French. Now, around about this time as well, we get the Prince of Orange sees that the farmhouse is in trouble, and he orders a guy called Ompteda to attack the Tirailleurs. Now, Tirailleurs is a veteran of the peninsula. He's tells the prince, who was a 23-year-old, essentially that there's some concealed French cavalry in the vicinity. So presumably it could be that the crops are too high, or they're behind this orchard here somewhere. But the Prince of Orange is supposed to have called in Ompteda's called his courage into question, and so Ompteda has to carry on, and he moves his battalions, the battalion, the 5th Battalion and the 8th Battalion. Essentially, they move into line and to drive back these skirmishers from the edge of La Haye Sainte. And it's as they're in line doing this, and then of course they get attacked by a force of cavalry. And in this charge, Taylor is killed, and the 8th Line Battalion is essentially destroyed. The 5th Line was described as being further east, so presumably somewhere in this area here. And they just about managed to form square, and are covered by a partial charge by the Household Brigade. But essentially what it means is that Haye Sainte is remains unrelieved at this point. And so Ney is increasing the amount of troops that are coming into here, and eventually the farm falls. The ammunition is spent, and Major Baring and 42 men of the 9 companies detailed to defend this barn managed to escape through this garden and return to the line, the Allied line up here. And he describes this as, I think it was him who says this. It's a letter, actually it was Lieutenant Graham, but he says, we all had to pass through a narrow passage. We wanted to halt the men and make one more charge, but it was impossible. The fellows were firing down the passage. An officer of our company called to me, "Take care," but I was too busy stopping the men and answered, "Never mind, let the blackguard fire." And he was about 5 yards off and levelling his piece just at me when this officer stabbed him in the mouth and out through his neck, and he fell immediately. So the French are in this building here. But now they flocked in. This officer got 2 shots and ran into the room where he lay behind a bed all the time. They had possession of the house. Sometimes the room was full of them, and some wounded soldiers of ours who lay there and cried out "Pardon" were shot. The monsters saying, "Take that for the fine defence you've made." An officer and 4 men came first in, and the officer got me by the collar and said to his men, "Ceci coquin." Immediately the fellows had their bayonets down and made a dead stick at me, which I parried off with my sword, and the officer always running about and then coming to me again and shaking me by the collar. But they all looked so frightened and pale as ashes. I thought, "You shan't keep me," and I bolted through the lobby. They fired 2 shots after me and cried out "coquin," which means rascal, but they didn't follow me. I rejoined the remnant of the regiment, where we were immediately charged by cuirassiers. All the army was formed in squares, and we hastily got our men into a hollow and peppered them. So I believe they found the cuirass not thick enough for rifles. And that was a letter that Lieutenant Graham wrote. He was a member of the 2nd Light Battalion, and he wrote that in June 1815. And this is happening around about 6 o'clock in the afternoon. There's a description here as well about the impact that this has on the line. So Lieutenant Colonel Leach is the brevet major of the 95th Rifles, and he commanded, essentially they were commanding this area here to the sort of north of the farmhouse where this monument is. And he describes the loss of the farm had on the rest of the line. And the French, he said, instantly filled the house with the swarms of sharpshooters whose deadly fire precluded the possibility of our holding the knoll and the ground immediately around it. So I believe they're talking about this area here, and we're talking possibly that they've taken this farmhouse, and they're now in a position to come into this garden and fire upon the British in the sand pit over there. they said they established strong and numerous line of infantry extending along the front of Kempt's brigade, and those Frenchmen, however, knelt down and exposed only their heads and shoulders to our fire. And in this manner, the contest was carried on between them and us until the general advance of the whole of the Duke of Wellington's army against the French position immediately after the total defeat of the Imperial Guard. So they're basically saying they're having a standoff here for the rest of the battle, which is probably going on for another two to 3 hours in this position. It says, from the time that the Haye Sainte fell into the hands of the French until the moment of the general advance of the army, the mode of attack and defence was remarkable for its sameness, but I speak merely of what took place immediately about our part of the position. So there seems to be a bit of a stalemate going on in this area from that point of view. He says the distance between the hostile lines, he imagined it to be about 100 yards. Between Kempt's and some of Lambert's regiments posted along the thorn hedge and the French infantry lining the knoll and the crest of the hill near it. So it suggests he's talking about a knoll, and it's hard to see now because I think some of the material for that mound over there comes from this area. This road was a lot more sunken, and I think he's describing looking out in this direction here. He says, several times the French officers are making desperate attempts to induce their men to charge Kempt's line, and I saw more than once parties of the French in our front spring up from their kneeling position and advance some yards towards the thorn hedge. And this thorn hedge, I think, lines the road. Headed by officers with vehement gestures, but our fire was very hot and deadly that they almost instantly ran back behind the crest of the hill, always leaving a great many killed or disabled behind them. So I think we're talking about the defense in this area here. Essentially, so Haye Sainte is falling at around about 6 o'clock in the evening, and this is a significant part of the battle. This means that the French now can get a foothold onto the ridge here above us. And they manage eventually to, so they're forcing back the 95th from the sandpit here. They're all getting back on these buildings, by the way. I don't think were here at the time, and they're trying to push up onto this road at this point. They describe how the Torellis now extended east and west from the farmhouse, gaining positions on the ridge to be able to fire on the Allies. So we can assume then that they've managed now, because this farmhouse is no longer here anymore, they can now push up onto this top of this ridge here. They also describe how some light artillery are brought up as well, and they can then fire upon Kempt, Lambert and Alton squares. We mentioned that in the last stream, how Alton's squares were essentially killed in place because they were pinned, couldn't move, and had run out of ammunition, but they were being fired upon by artillery. The 95th Rifles in this area here are trying their best to silence the artillery, and they say, but the artillery are brought further up, slightly more to the west to avoid them, so maybe a little bit further this way. And essentially what he's getting then is he's managed to now to get his artillery up here to pour fire into the British squares. Okay, so that seems to be a good place to just take a quick break. Thank you for if you're watching for doing that, for listening. I'm going to take a quick couple of minute break, and when we come back, we will start to have a look at the situation, the desperate situation now on top of this ridge. I'm just trying to find a good place to start. We'll probably start discussing Wellington's running out of reserves and preparing for the approach of the old guard. Okay, I'll take a break there, and when I come back, we'll start off again.